When the HOA president slapped a bright red violation notice on my yacht, she smiled like she had finally won. According to her, the boat was illegal, an eyesore, and a threat to property values. She demanded it be removed from the harbor within 72 hours, or face crushing fines. Neighbors gathered, phones out, whispering as if they were witnessing a public execution. I stood there on the dock, hands in my pockets, listening calmly while she lectured me about rules, permits, and power. What she didn't know was that every word she spoke was tightening a noose around her own authority. This wasn't just about a yacht. It was about control. For years, our HOA had grown bold, issuing citations for flower colors, mailbox heights, and even the sound of laughter after dusk. The harbor was their latest conquest, and my yacht became the symbol they wanted to crush. The president waved a binder full of regulations, quoting clauses with dramatic pauses, enjoying the attention. She told me I was lucky she was being generous. I asked one simple question: who exactly owned the harbor? She laughed. The crowd laughed. Cameras caught the moment, the confident smirk, the certainty that I was cornered. But beneath the waterline, the truth waited patiently. This harbor wasn't a public amenity. It wasn't HOA property. It was a privately held marina, leased decades ago, under a complex agreement most residents had never read. An agreement my family signed. My grandfather built this harbor when the town was barely a whisper. He dredged the channel, poured the concrete slips, and negotiated rights that would last generations. Over time, the paperwork gathered dust while the HOA rose and forgot its limits. I inherited more than a yacht. I inherited leverage. As the president finished her speech, she demanded my signature acknowledging the violation. I smiled back, politely declined, and told her I would see her at the next board meeting. Confusion rippled through the crowd. She warned me not to test her patience. I thanked her for the notice and walked away, knowing the storm she had summoned was about to turn. That night, messages flooded my phone, some mocking, some worried, all curious. The HOA president emailed again, escalating fines and deadlines, copying lawyers who had no idea what waited ahead. I opened an old safe, pulled yellowed documents, and felt calm settle in. This fight would not be loud. It would be precise, undeniable, and public. By morning, the board would realize they had challenged the wrong harbor, the wrong family, and the wrong history entirely. None of them understood how quickly authority collapses when paperwork, patience, and ownership align against arrogance in broad daylight for everyone. The board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening, advertised as routine, yet the room filled early with restless energy. Folding chairs scraped the floor as neighbors squeezed in, eager for drama. The HOA president sat centered, flanked by nervous board members and a lawyer scrolling on a tablet. She opened with confidence, announcing my continued non-compliance and the intention to seize my slip. She spoke as if the outcome was already signed, stamped, and inevitable. When my turn came, I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice or challenge her authority. I simply asked for the floor and projected a single document onto the screen. The title slide showed the harbor's original deed, dated decades before the HOA existed. Murmurs spread. The lawyer leaned forward. The president frowned, sensing a shift she couldn't name. I explained slowly how the harbor was constructed, financed, and legally separated from HOA jurisdiction. I described the long-term lease that allowed residents access while preserving ownership rights. Clause by clause, I walked through language that limited enforcement power, prohibited seizures, and required consent from the owner. My name appeared repeatedly, not as a violator, but as the controlling party. The president interrupted, accusing me of manipulation. I thanked her and continued. Her lawyer whispered urgently, but she waved him off, determined to dominate the room. I then introduced the addendum, a forgotten amendment granting the owner authority to revoke access if governance became abusive. Silence followed. People stopped recording. The board members exchanged looks of panic. I concluded by stating that the violation notice was void, the fines unenforceable, and the public shaming actionable. I offered a choice: rescind the notice, apologize publicly, and reset governance boundaries, or face immediate termination of the harbor lease. The word termination echoed like a gunshot. For the first time, the president looked unsure. She called for a recess, but the damage was done. Neighbors whispered not with excitement, but with fear. They realized the HOA's power rested on permission, not supremacy. I packed my papers calmly, knowing control had already changed hands. Outside, the night air felt lighter. Board members avoided my eyes, while residents asked quiet questions about what came next. I told them stability required humility, and rules required limits. The president never returned from recess. Instead, her lawyer delivered a short statement postponing all enforcement actions. It was a retreat disguised as procedure. I walked back to the dock, past my yacht resting peacefully, certain that by sunrise, the HOA would understand the cost of overreach. None of this required threats, only documents, patience, and the willingness to let truth speak louder than authority ever could when challenged by someone who actually owned the ground beneath their rules entirely. By Thursday, the retaliation arrived disguised as policy updates and emergency notices. Emails claimed the harbor required sudden maintenance, access temporarily restricted for safety. Residents panicked about boats, schedules, and permits. The HOA hoped confusion would pressure me into compromise. Instead, it triggered the clause they had ignored. I sent a formal notice invoking my ownership rights and suspending HOA access effective immediately. Security gates locked, keycards deactivated. The marina office posted a simple sign explaining that governance authority was under review. Chaos followed. Charter operators called lawyers. Residents demanded explanations. The HOA president resurfaced, furious, accusing me of sabotage and abuse of power. Ironically, those were her favorite words. I documented everything. Calls, messages, threats. Then I released a public timeline detailing years of overreach, paired with scanned agreements proving the harbor's independence. Local media noticed. Headlines questioned how an HOA claimed control over property it didn't own. Interviews followed. I remained calm, factual, and brief. The contrast mattered. Under pressure, the board called an emergency meeting without the president. They proposed negotiation. I attended, not as a resident pleading, but as an owner offering terms. I demanded governance reform, independent audits, and the president's removal for misconduct. In exchange, I would restore access and stabilize operations. It was leverage, clean and legal. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. The president was suspended pending investigation. Apologies were drafted. The violation notice against my yacht was formally rescinded and labeled an error. Fines were refunded community-wide. Power shifted quietly but permanently. That evening, I walked the dock as the sun set behind masts and calm water. Neighbors nodded with respect, some with relief. The yacht never moved. It never needed to. The lesson had traveled farther than any boat could. Behind the scenes, attorneys finalized revisions ensuring transparency and limits. New elections were scheduled. Residents volunteered for committees, suddenly aware that participation mattered. The harbor returned to normal operation, better documented and better protected. I didn't celebrate. I simply enforced boundaries that should have existed all along. Authority, I learned, shrinks when exposed to daylight and records. It grows only when people stop reading what they sign and surrender ownership to convenience and fear. This was never revenge. It was correction. A reminder that power borrowed without consent eventually expires. The HOA survived, smaller and wiser. The harbor remained steady. And my yacht, once declared illegal, became a symbol not of wealth, but of the importance of knowing exactly what you own. Ownership is quiet, patient and written down, waiting for the moment arrogance forgets to read the fine print. When that moment arrives, consequences follow swiftly, publicly and without the need for shouting or spectacle because documents speak for themselves. Months later, the harbor felt different. Not quieter, but fairer. Rules existed, yet they made sense. The new board communicated clearly, published budgets, and invited scrutiny. Residents asked questions without fear. The memory of the yacht incident lingered like a cautionary tale, retold whenever authority tempted excess. The former president disappeared from meetings and messages. Investigations confirmed misuse of power, selective enforcement, and intimidation. She resigned quietly. No parade followed, no victory speech. Accountability rarely arrives with applause. It arrives with paperwork, signatures, and silence. My yacht remained exactly where it had always been. Visitors often asked about the story, expecting bravado or bitterness. I told it plainly. Ownership is not about dominance. It is about responsibility and boundaries. The harbor thrived because someone finally enforced both. Looking back, I realized how easily the outcome could have differed. If I had panicked, argued emotionally, or ignored the notice, the HOA might have succeeded. Knowledge mattered more than volume. Preparation mattered more than outrage. The system didn't break. It worked once the right documents entered the room. The experience changed how I approach every contract and community. I read slower. I ask harder questions. I respect rules that respect ownership. And when authority oversteps, I respond calmly, with evidence, not ego. This story isn't about a yacht. It's about remembering who holds power and why. Because sometimes the quietest person at the meeting owns the harbor beneath everyone's feet. After everything settled, the community organized an open harbor day, inviting residents to learn how the marina actually functioned. Engineers explained maintenance. Accountants explained costs. Transparency replaced rumor. People laughed about the old days, but they also listened more closely. The lesson stuck because it was lived, not lectured. Rules felt lighter when paired with understanding, and authority felt safer when clearly limited. I still keep the original violation notice in a folder, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Paper can threaten or protect depending on who reads it. When power forgets its source, it overreaches. When ownership remembers its rights, balance returns. That balance is fragile, maintained by attention and courage. Lose either and the cycle begins again. So if you ever face authority that sounds absolute, pause. Ask who wrote the rules, who owns the ground, and who benefits from silence. Sometimes the strongest move is not resistance, but reading. Because somewhere in the fine print, your leverage is waiting. This harbor taught me that calm persistence outlasts outrage, and knowledge quietly outmaneuvers those who rely on noise alone. It is a lesson worth remembering. Long after the water settles and the meeting room empties, power fades, but ownership, clearly defined, endures longer than any term or title, especially when challenged publicly calmly. If you enjoyed this story and want to see how people try to push their power too far, subscribe, like this video, and drop a comment telling us what you would have done in this situation. Every like and comment helps us bring you even more shocking, real-life HOA and Karen stories.